It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
All right, welcome in. We've got the Arizona Cardinals are not quite yet on the clock. Give it about another 24 hours or so. We'll be able to see that, and it's an exciting time for Cardinals fans. Everyone's putting in their last mock drafts, Marcos. Everyone's putting in their last predictions. Rumors are flying left and right as things are starting to be able to leak out, where now we're getting more valid information. There's trade rumblings. Just an exciting time, at least, to be here. We're here to break all of it down before the draft tomorrow, Marcos. As we get into it, how are you doing, and how are you feeling about the opportunity for the Cardinals to bring in, at least for sure, one new player tomorrow, and probably at least for now just 6 picks? Maybe it'll be more, maybe there's less depending on movement, but bring in some new Arizona Cardinals. What's going on?
Well, the prime thing is that we're in a trade down territory, and you have no idea what Monty Onsifort's going to do. None of us have any idea if he's going to, sell the pick and he's going to trade back. It seems like that's his approach, and I'm actually starting to become a fan of the shotgun approach. So that's the one thing that's very interesting. Year by year under Keim, we, for the most part, just stuck in our, position and picked. And with Monty Ossenfort, like that, he dangles those picks. So like that's what's exciting. Is he going to bring in one good player? Is he going to bring in one later in the round, or is he going to trade out of that round completely and get more picks in the second round or for the future? But the way I feel right now is like everything's on the table.
Yeah, everything is indeed on the table. I think that there's some things we can talk about of being less likely than others, such as trading up, like you talk about with Monty Ossenfort. We have seen the Cardinals trade up essentially one time to get back up into the top 6 to be able to acquire Paris Johnson. But this is some statistics from Seth Walder, who is an analytics profile guy. He says that the easiest way to win in the NFL draft is trading down. So essentially, when you are not doing this, you're missing out on high leverage advantageous. It's not quite that simple, but it mostly is, which makes a lot of sense. Like you said, use a scatter shot approach, get as many draft picks as possible. Your chances of hitting on those draft picks then go up and increase. And we'll talk a bit about some trade down areas for the Cardinals, and even if it is likely this year, given the talent that they have. But yeah, Marcos, as we hop into it now, the latest news that we have at the top of the draft seems to be quite a bit of questions as to who exactly is going to be drafted or traded down by from the Jacksonville Jaguars. That leads into some of these other players who could go a little bit higher than we might think, especially what it sounds like. The offensive tackles have a good chance to go early. The Georgia guys have a good chance to go early. And there's a couple of key players who, due to injury reasons, may be falling down a few draft boards last minute.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you just mentioned, there's a certain amount of positions that go on runs and stuff. So it happens every single year. It changes between wide receivers to offensive tackle and sometimes both. It usually happens with edge rushers, maybe even like cornerbacks at time to time. Once somebody gets chosen, CB1, wide receiver 1, OT1, they start just they start going on that run because they think to themselves, oh, we're going to have to, we panic because we didn't get our guy, but we're going to get the guy who's like the second best in that, position group and whatnot. So with all that happening, and if it happens in bunches, that leaves good premium positions that we could be looking for that'll fall to us, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the cases that you'll see because this is a interesting setup. Let's go and start off at least with just some of the latest news that we've seen come out, which most of the time is going to be decision makers making mock drafts. So the way that we'll start is we'll look at a couple of these different mock drafts, at least kind of assess some of the things that we've seen as far as changes, things that have popped up a little bit differently between, and knowing that in the past, we've seen some people have been able to really accurately nail who the Cardinals were going to get. Others have not. So we'll start with Daniel Jeremiah, the guy who's the closest thing that we've seen probably to being a general manager in the NFL with how he breaks things down as a former scout. He's got it pretty chalk for the most part without that much as far as trades happening. We're seeing it pretty much the same that we've seen for the top 4 picks for the last month or so. You got a quarterback, the Heisman winner, the pass rusher to the Giants, Will Campbell going to the Patriots, seems in stone. You got a couple of movers and shakers. The biggest one at least seems to be Kelvin Banks Jr. going at 6, and that being the case because Ashton Jeanty, who's been mocked at 6 overall for the last who knows how many 2 months or so, is now going earlier at pick number 5. Now, there's been some rumors that have popped up. The Chicago Bears seem very interested in adding him to an offense that has Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, and is a pretty revamped, coaching staff behind Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. Now, this is the first sort of shakeup that I think we could end up seeing is Banks. He's not been mocked anywhere above from what we've seen the 12th or 13th pick. Now it seems like he's flown up the rankings, which has dropped Mason Graham down to pick number 8 is where he's being projected now to the Jaguars. We've also seen the edge rushers. We've seen Jalen Walker going at 15. He'd been mocked at around 8. He's dropped down some. Well, Michael Williams, he's kind of swapped up to pick 9 with New Orleans. The one thing I'm taking away from this as well, Marcos, I ain't seeing any quarterbacks there after Shedeur Sanders at 21 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Seems like that would be in the late first, a spot where teams could trade up. What are some of your thoughts about how the talent has fallen? And even looking in the NFC West, it's kind of interesting. You've got the Niners taking a guard, with most people mock Breeze Able at, out of the, it was not even a Power 5 conference. You're seeing the tight end going, at least with the Broncos, trading up from 20 to 13. You're also seeing a guy like a Derek Harmon, who's been mocked inside of the top 10, sometimes to the Cardinals, falling down draft boards. And you're also seeing Jahdae Barron, who's been mocked as high as 7th overall. He's kind of falling down to pick 29. Well, Josh Connerly makes it into the first round. And in this final mock, no Josh Simmons, it seems like. He's fallen out of the final first-round mock of Daniel Jeremiah. Let's go and check a couple of others. We've got Peter Schrager from NFL Network, who has his team very similar as far as for his mock draft setup. Got your first 3 to 4 set and good as normal. Gianti, and now he's got Membo, Warren, and then Jalen Walker are the ones that he's got in that spot. So Mason Graham essentially is still taking a tumble in some of these mock drafts, which I find kind of interesting. You're able to at least see Walter Nolan is one of the guys that they have. I think the Cardinals are interest in him. Colts moving up for a tight end. Cowboys taking Tyler Booker well ahead while Mason Graham falls all the way to 13. I think that's probably his floor. We see Kelvin Banks Jr. goes ahead of where the Cardinals are. Now, Traeger did mock Jahdae Barron, the cornerback, over to the Cardinals, talked about being the top cornerback. We can talk a little bit about some guys who have fallen in these mock drafts that people haven't seen as well when we get there. But in this scenario, you're going to see at least a couple of other guys like Arizona's Tet McMillan fall down. Still only about 2 first-round quarterbacks seems to be the case. And in this spot as well, Josh Simmons goes all the way to pick number 27. You know who I'm not seeing in here? Up there he is. You've got James Pierce Jr., have considered to the Cardinals. He's falling out of the first round in some mock drafts. And Will Johnson, the cornerback. Apparently, he has a knee question, and because he did not run his 40, I don't know if that makes a huge difference for teams, but it does seem like injury questions have pushed him a little bit down the draft board. Now, let's talk with Benjamin Albright, someone who we've had on the previous Revenge of the Birds podcast before. As far as one of the friends of us, and also I will say at least Cardinals fans in general, we've stayed connected with him throughout the years. He's got the Cardinals taking offensive lineman Josh Simmons, so he's got Simmons going a bit higher. I know we've talked a little bit in some drafts yesterday about Simmons. Seemed like his stock was being boosted. He's also got Kelvin Banks Jr. making his way into the top 10. The Niners getting Mason Graham. Cowboys go with a wide receiver. Barron ends up going up at 13. And then some of the other players that we're seeing, at least as far as Tyler Booker, James Pierce Jr., all seem to be falling now down to the late first. So all of this, at least to kind of say, at least Marcos, is we've got a lot of last minute information that's popping up. We're not seeing Will Johnson, who's here. We're seeing some people go with James Pierce Jr., but it's nowhere near the top 15 picks. It's interesting to see as some of these last minute things are leaking out. A lot of people will say, could this be smoke? Could this be fire? What are some of your thoughts on these last minute swings in mock drafts?
It's always, to me, it's always smoke. It's trying to kind of like throw some like, well, this is what's being discussed with Monty Ossenfort. Wrong Monty. This is what's being discussed, is that he loves to like kind of play the whole like smoke game. So he did it his first year. We knew from like some of the little things that we heard about his draft style and whatnot, that he was going to dangle the pick and he was going to sell it, which is exactly what he did. He ended up selling it, went back to the 12th spot, thought he can get his guy still. So then he wheeled and deal, moved back up to the 6th spot to go get Paris Johnson Jr. And then on, last year's draft, he left it wide open. He said, hey, everything's on the table. Every pick is on the table. I'm not set on somebody when in reality he was set. I don't think they ever considered like trading that pick, but they just wanted to put it out there to see what kind of takers would be on the table. So same thing comes in this situation. He's looking to see what can he do with that pick. And if he can't do best case scenario, if he's trading out of that pick and it becomes a worse situation, he doesn't want to do it. He wants to get his best case scenario. He wants to wait to see who gets drafted. And then once we get to pick 15 and we're like, hey, look, this guy's still on the board and this guy is a faller. Hey, do you want to maybe give us a pick for that? You want to, we don't mind moving back. I mean, it's all about you guys. You guys want your guy or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit too. Also, there's some players that we're seeing that the Cardinals, I think, would pass on. Some who are going earlier in some of these mock drafts, some who are not. Let's talk a little bit about ruling some guys out before we focus in on pick number 16. With, like you said, the possibility that the Cardinals could potentially move or trade back. So some players we are not going to see on the board, at least, and it mostly is going to be the guys who are the top 10 talents in this draft, which is going to, of course, include guys like Travis Hunter, Bill Carter. We don't have to talk about some of those. Tet McMillan is a unique one. I know some Cardinals fans have wondered, could you pair Marvin Harrison Jr. with Tet McMillan? I think we can rule that out as far as recognizing that they probably already have their wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 on the team, but we can call it in this case receiver 1 and receiver 2, because that would be the great Trey McBride, who just is now nearly the highest paid tight end in the NFL. Cardinals are probably not going to invest another pick at wide receiver. And McMillan's unique. He also is a guy that some teams wonder, is football a means to an end? Others look at him being 6'5", 212. Does he get separation? How contested is he? There's plenty of U of A fans who'd love to have him, but I don't think that he is one of the guys that's going to be on the card for the Cardinals available. It seems like if the Jacksonville Jaguars do end up swinging a trade to move back, he may be the guy that they take in the top 10. If he's not, there's a chance he could end up falling, and he would probably fall past Arizona. Another player, at least, that we had questioned about if he'd be on their board or not, in Walter Nolan. It does seem like he is going to be one of those guys in their top 4, top 5 for the Cardinals as a possibility. We don't see them taking a safety. We've been able to rule out both Malachi Starks and even maybe Nick, I think it's Emenwari. I have to remember the exact, Emenwari, excuse me. He's going to be probably ruled out too. He is more of a developmental safety with first-round athleticism, but the Cardinals at safety is probably their deepest position that they have. Another guy that we have been able to rule out, despite not hearing anything to the contrary, is Mike Green. We know the team usually uses top 30 visits on players that they're going to consider drafting, or players that they want to find out more about to know, hey, like, you got these issues off field. Does the person and their character match what people are saying about them, or do we see something different here? And Mike Green's one of those guys they did not bring in. He's currently going through 2 sexual assault charges from different schools that had been previously. He's a guy that I think could go off the board before the Cardinals pick, or he could fall to the second round. It seems it will be dependent on, it only takes one team, as we say, but that team would probably have to be the Atlanta Falcons. Maybe it would be the Bengals, 1 pick after the Cardinals. We've also been able to rule out a cornerback in Jahdae Barron with his size, weight, and speed profile. What we know about the Cardinals is they like the Max Melton types, the 6'2", 200, having longer reach of their arms. Barron, at least, is a guy I think could play outside. And Marcos, maybe you could speak onto this with watching defensive backs, but whenever I watch him, I look at him and say, if Will Johnson's maybe got questions about his knee and is a little bit slower as far as his 40, and Barron's a little bit smaller than the profile that the Cardinals are looking for, it just feels to me like you've already got one of the best slot defenders in the NFL in Garrett Williams. I don't think this is something the Cardinals should be investing in. You never have too many corners, but I think you would take a guy like that probably in round 2, 3, or maybe even round 4 if you wanted to add one.
Yeah, he profiles as like the inside outside cornerback, the one that busts up screens. He's very good. He's very physical. He's the type of corner that you can see storm the alley whenever they would have any type of run game. So he'd be a good run defender in that perspective. But that's what happens when you already got a corner in Garrett Williams that you already profiled as an inside cornerback, and there's no indications of them wanting to kick him out, or no indications of them saying, yeah, we're going to try to get him to play some snaps outside and whatnot. So Garrett Williams owns that slot cornerback position, and that's where they're going to pretty much just pigeonhole him for now. So when you get somebody like Jahdae Barrett, who was 5'11", when you have him playing on the outside, those big physical guys are just going to give him problems just because of his size. And that's why if it was a circumstance where Garrett Williams wasn't panning out at the slot, or we didn't have Garrett Williams to begin with, I would, I'd be good for that pick because of his physicality. But at this point, I wouldn't consider it.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, I think, to have multiple slot cornerbacks, at least when you've got one who I think already you can at least get some use out of in Keitrell as a backup, adding another first-round pick on one who's not going to be a shutdown corner outside. We've been able to route Jihad Campbell, who a lot of people have saw as a fit. There's 2 reasons why we've talked about. One seems to be that there is a shoulder issue that he's had, at least, that is causing teams some concern. He may slip out of the first round entirely. He's talented. He's been able to show some ability to rush the passer. He shows like it being a physical freak. The biggest thing ultimately, I think, with him also is what we see with the Cardinals. They love offensive linemen. They love defensive linemen. They love cornerbacks investing in, be able to have those versatile playmakers in the secondary. And they'll be able to invest in like the number 1 wide receiver types. They really have just used athletic day 3 linebackers and backups to kind of get by, and I don't see that changing this year, where they would spend a big pick on a guy in Campbell, much less one that has some injury questions. Similar with Johnson. We've talked a bit about the receivers and the tight ends already. Cardinals are not going to add a first-round tight end, and that's going to take us down to kind of some of the other players on the big board that may be potential options for Arizona. Emeka Egbuka, we can probably rule out. Kenneth Grant, someone the Cardinals have had in. It seems like that he would be more of a trade back candidate in case they're able to move back from 16. So it's not someone that you rule out, but it doesn't seem like he's going to be in the final area at pick number 16. We've talked at least a little bit about Pierce, and those are kind of out of the guys that we say the Cardinals may have available but would not take. That's going to be about what you're looking for here. So let's talk now a little bit about what do we have as far as with when you're building your board, you want to take a look. Here's the guys who are not here for the Cardinals. Here are the guys who are going to be here. This is my list of 4 for you, Marcos. We have 4 guys, and one of my former site boss and kind of one of our friends of the show, and Seth Cox, had the exact same 4 guys, at least for who we wanted for the Arizona Cardinals. This came out on April 21st, so a couple of days ago. Looking at offensive lineman Josh Simmons was probably the number 1 player I'd be looking at as far as for team fit, for need. Michael Williams, a close number 2. This then would be following by Derek Harmon and then Walter Nolan. All of these are guys who I think have a good shot to be there at pick 16. All of these are guys I think I'd take with the 16th pick. We can go through some of those now, but Marco's curious, if you had to kind of pick your top guys that you're targeting for the Cardinals with that pick, who are you looking at?
Yeah, I think Walter Nolan is going to be my number 1 when it comes to that list. Number 1 would be him. Unfortunately, Will Johnson was my number 1, but when the medicals are this iffy close to the draft, he kind of dropped out of that position. So it would be Walter Nolan. Kenneth Grant would be number 2. Number 3, I would go for Josh Simmons at that point, because those two players are gone. You would want to trade back in that circumstance. And if you trade back from pick 16, Josh Simmons is a even though we've gone offense for the last 2 years, at least you solidify that group. And I can't say like no to a late round offensive lineman, not one that you're reaching for, but somebody that you traded back to get more picks for. And it's hard for me to pick my last one. I'm trying to think about it right now at this moment, but I would love to go defense. So maybe even Jahdae Barron if we traded back, even though I just spoke about how it's not really a fit. I mean, he's still somebody that we can add to our group of cornerbacks to compete.
I think that's at least something we can definitely look at if you are a Cardinals fan. I'll get some of these typed up at least as far as for putting that over in the banner. And then we'll kind of go over some of what we like about the different players. So we're going to start with some of the ones we had in common, which of course is going to be with Walter Nolan is one that we had in common. We've got Derek Harmon being one. We have, of course, Josh Simmons being one that's shared between us. And then we got a couple of others. We've got Michael Williams with... I believe the likes of, like you said, Jahdae Barron, kind of rounding out our kind of group top 5 that we have here for that one. So here we're going to have that show on the screen. Let's talk a little bit about each of these different players. And let's start with the guy that I think makes the most sense for the Arizona Cardinals and the guy that's been connected to them probably since the hiring of, I want to say his name being Cardinals, the coach, Justin Fry.
Yeah, Fry.
That would be just Josh Simmons. And this is one of the guys who, to start, looked like he was going to be online to be like the next DJ Humphries, right up there with Will Campbell and being one of the top tackle picks. He has not an ACL, but a patellar tendon issue, which is a lot harder to be able to bounce back and to recover from. So a lot of people have been mocking him late first round. He's gone to the Chiefs in like 400 or something like that projections online because they need a left tackle. He's got all of the ability to be a top tackle. To me, when I watched him, he was one of those guys that was probably the closest to having Pro Bowl level talent and doesn't have as many question marks as some of the other guys. Armand Membo seems like he could be a stud left tackle. Kelvin Banks, some people see him as a guard. Membo seems to be the guy that has production, maybe hasn't proved it at the highest level, but at Missouri, he was able to go up against SEC competition and then had that incredible athletic performance at the combine. But Simmons, when you look at him on tape, he seems to be much more of a pass protector and great run blocker who can get out in space, has the athleticism, kind of passes all of the different thresholds that you're looking for top offensive linemen. There's a clip where he's, I believe, working and studying film of Joe Thomas talking about here's the technique that makes him great and how he tries to mirror some of his game. This is a guy that, kind of wants it. And when you talk about a few shorter arms like Will Campbell, you talk a little bit about some of the other things with, is Banks a guard? Is he a tackle? And then you look at even a Josh Connerly. Some people have slotted him to say that he could be maybe the first round, 5th tackle worthy. But some people just haven't pegged as he's a guard with those movement skills, and he would be maybe an adequate, all right, offensive tackle. Either way, this is something where this is a player that I don't think the Cardinals would normally have available to them at the 16th pick. And when you talk about everything else, you're like, all right, it's another Ohio State guy. We know that they love guys from Ohio State. He's got some of that top 10 sort of pedigree. You're believing that the character at least is going to probably pass, although there's been a question or two that may pop up. And we can get into some of those things, at least in a bit of fans are really curious, at least. But for the most part, we've kind of seen his stock bump back up into where now his ceiling seems to be going anywhere from pick 11 back to pick 31. He seems to still be a first round lock. It's very curious, Marcos. What are some of your thoughts, at least on Simmons, while I kind of pull up a little bit as far as with either some clips or just some of the overall stuff that we've seen, since this is probably the one guy a lot of Cardinals fans may have not pictured versus a defensive lineman. But when you look at that right tackle spot being 1 year left of an injured, kind of coming off injury, Jonah Williams, Kelvin Beachum is already pretty old, and they have a 5th round pick from last year. They maybe could take a chance on a guy who's not going to quite be healthy up front, but is able to long-term be a successful pick.
Yeah, and you're going to develop him as your future right tackle at that point. So you're not throwing him out into the wolves. You're putting him into the position where you don't have as much pressure as you do in the left tackle. You do have to be good, even if you're on the right side of the line. But he has all the tools to be able to do it, and he does remind me a lot about how DJ Humphries was when he came out. I believe it was like 2012, 2013 draft. No, 2006, 2015 draft is when DJ Humphries came
2015.
out, and he same profile, same big size, 6'5", has a little bit like his arms aren't. I mean, his arm length isn't all that crazy, but it's on the longer side, so that's always good when you're a tackle, especially if you're going up against edge rushers. You could definitely dominate him with the arm length. I mean, he's got the mobility. I can already tell just by looking at anything that I've seen clips of him, or like the little bit of film that I saw from him. He's having that mobility would help, especially in the run game. And it's just now that you get somebody that's young, you got him for 4 years, you pick up his 5th-year option, you have him cheap and whatnot. That would help solidify that position. To me, I think 16 would be too high because in that situation, I am trying to get a good defender, somebody that's tops on defense. But if all those players are gone, I can't argue with like, hey, this is the best value pick. Ohio State, you just got Paris Johnson from there. You got his coach. Now you got this line that's going to develop young and have like some sort of chemistry. And going forth, I mean, that can't be bad. I mean, we already saw exactly what happened to the Chiefs. They don't have any protection on the edges, and it ended up becoming their downfall at the end of the day.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we saw as the Chiefs were able to get there, but weren't able to kind of finish it. One of the things, at least, and we can talk about some of our comments. We got a comment here from Dana over there into the chat, at least talking about like, yeah, maybe there's some other questions that people have in the locker room character. That's been one of the things that came out previously. I believe it was part of, I think it was Tony Pauline was one of the people who had that. And one of the things, at least, that popped up with it was that one of these anonymous scouts kind of was on, I believe, quoted and called him what seemed to be either a curse word or a slur. We're not quite sure. We know that he's got a septum piercing, and so the questions obviously would be, well, how much with the anonymous scout? Because when you're anonymous, you can say anything. How much of it is, hey, like this person's leaking a little bit of truth while agents know they're trying to kind of control whatever the narrative would be. The biggest thing I think ultimately that is an advantage for the Cardinals is they decide and have Josh Simmons on their board and they pass on him or have him removed from their board. You'll know it's because they had his offensive line coach, the very coach who coached him in that position in college, which means that I'm going to probably say that if that guy is not going to know the truth, then you're probably not going to know what's happening with each of those. So that's where I think Arizona is at an advantage here. Because you're going to be at someone who's a little bit closer to the situation. And like we said, you look at the player, he's a top 10 guy on film. When you see the knee injury, part of the reason there's been some questions and concern is because the recovery rate from that has not been great historically throughout the NFL. So then you're like, all right, well, is he going to be ready for contact? How's the recovery going? Getting some insight into, how is the knee actually holding up? All of those are things, at least, that Justin Fry will likely have insight into. It's kind of like when we were talking about the Cardinals adding Josh Sweat in free agency. Jonathan Gannon was one of the guys who was in the room who drafted Josh Sweat. And so you're like, hey, if he's a guy who's going to go after Josh Sweat, that's not going to be a guy that he's just going to say, hey, like, we're going to do this. Same with when the Cardinals brought in Kaiser White. The other thing about Simmons that I do like is he does fit the scheme in terms of getting out in space. So Drew Petzing runs a lot of counter where you're going to have a guard or a tackle or someone will pull in space, be able to kind of run the ball. And they love being able to do that because you're essentially able to take defenses and find matchups in your run game down the field. So like right here, you're taking a look at Simmons. You've got an encroaching, I believe that's a safety or a linebacker. And they're just able to clean up to be able to kind of push that man out of the way. You've got another tight end coming on the backside over there. Those are all areas that the Arizona Cardinals run. They're not going to be more of that power gap scheme, which, interestingly enough, that power gap scheme is what one of the guys who the Arizona Cardinals could be targeting is best at, and that would be Tyler Booker, the right guard, or I should say in this situation, left guard for the Alabama Crimson Tide. He's a guy that didn't have the running skills that really kind of stood out as far as the athleticism compared to seeing the film for someone like a Josh Simmons. I'll do a quick show at least of just that relative athletic score so you guys can see. I still see on the film a guy who's solid in pass protection, doesn't give up sacks. He can open up lanes like nothing, like he'll shove one or two guys out of the way. But you can see at least as far as for with his bench press, he had a 21 on the bench, which a lot of times you're going to be probably looking at about 25 at least is going to be what you're wanting for your offensive lineman. And when it came to his explosive grade, he had a poor broad jump. 10 feet is considered a great broad jump. You want to kind of fall between, 8.5, maybe 9 shows some explosiveness. And when it came to the 40-yard dash, he finished not at the 5-second mark, but at the 5.4 second mark with a 20-yard split over 3 seconds. You're probably looking at when you average that out about 1.99. That means that he's going to be ultimately in probably the bottom 20% of all of the other athletic guards that you're looking at. And he did okay when it came to the change of direction. I've seen enough on film that I could say you may have to change some of your offense around a guy like Booker, but he is not as athletic as some of the linemen that the Cardinals usually would like the Paris Johnsons at the tackle spot. I think this is one of those places of where I think that you would be best to consider him if, let's say, the rest of your board is picked clean or you're trading back. I think those are the two scenarios I think you would see Tyler Booker. Otherwise, it'd be you're stuck at 16. You can't trade back. He's considered a huge, big-time leader and captain in that locker room. Will Anderson has spoken highly of him, considered one of the highest character. He'd be a future DJ Humphries on your line, future captain on offense, always talking to the media, being able to be that sort of leader. That makes him, I think, a safe pick. It just doesn't seem like it has, I think, exactly enough to make you kind of go, yeah, and jump out of your seat if you're a Cardinals fan, like maybe a healthy Josh Simmons would.
Yeah, absolutely. And those athletic traits is what gets us very, very excited. But one of the good things is with RES, it's great at being able to show you the explosiveness and where he compares. An example of that is somebody like Trey McBride. He had really good RES score. He had some explosiveness as being a tight end. And look how he turned out when he came to the very end of it. He's a tight end that plays just like a wide receiver. And he runs away from safeties. He runs away from linebackers. That's not even an issue for him. So you can take it, but you can also take it with a grain of salt when it comes to some players, because you do have the Derek Brown type of players that are poor when it comes to their RAS score or their combine, but their film looks amazing and stuff. So you could set that aside and tell yourself, hey, I like what I see on the film. That's why I'm picking up this guy. And when it drafting a guard for me is more of a need for us than it is for a tackle, especially a right tackle. If you go solidify the left guard position and you have Paris Johnson on that side, and then you got your center for the foreseeable future, not for the future, but foreseeable future. That side of the line looks at this point it would look elite in that situation. So that would help.
One of the best arguments you could have is you've drafted a tackle, you got a hole probably at least that's either going to go to a late round draft pick, being able to have a immediate starter on that line. That's part of the appeal, I think, at least of Booker. What we've seen at least, and this is a good comment that I've been able to see at least also there from Dana, thanks for popping in at least, is that we run gap schemes 60%, but it's the pin and pull power gap scheme. So the away from play guard pull. So what that means is think of it, you're running the ball to the left, handing it off to James Conner with Kyler Murray, and it's going to be your right guard's going to run around past the center to the left-hand side of the play. So that's going to mean is that a lot of times the way that they'll run that counter is that they'll snap the ball, they'll run it, and then you'll be able to have essentially within that scheme can get a mismatch. If you're saying, hey, we want to have this guard pull, he's going to move this defensive end out of the way, then that way James Conner can at least be able to run, and he can say, hey, I've got the gap that I can run it upfield. If the edge rusher is trying to play that kind of crash down on him to be able to see if he can make the tackle, James has got the ability to say, hey, maybe I can cut it outside, run up the field. Then you're talking about, do you have a tight end who's also in space getting a block? Do you have a receiver downfield who blocks? Cardinals are a run-the-ball-heavy offense, and that's something that I think is a little bit different from what Alabama's certainly going to be running with Tyler Booker. I don't think that it would be shocking, but I've said that if I had to have a sneaky suspicion, it would feel like to me that you're all right, Booker doesn't fit everything that they do. He may be a safe pick. Monty, we've not seen him draft a interior offensive lineman before day 3 and any of the stops he's been at or with Arizona. It feels almost like it'd be a Michael Bidwell, like, yeah, let's run the ball. Here's the best running the ball guy in the draft. I could see that being part of the influence on Arizona's draft plans. It may not be the final influence, but that would be something that would not shock me. Let's go ahead and shift it to the last of the offensive, I would say at least, away from the offensive linemen. We'll talk a little bit about Banks. We'll talk a little bit at least about just how that would probably play out. But right now it seems from the mock drafts, he looks like he's going anywhere as high as 6 to the Raiders. And the Jaguars seem to have him as their second best tackle on the board, all the way down to picks 11 or 13 even for the Miami Dolphins. Some are even wondering if someone would trade up ahead of the Cardinals for the likes of Kelvin Banks Jr. Let's go ahead and we're going to talk about another guy, at least, who is really interesting. This is going to be Walter Nolan, who is a guy that has had some polarizing questions about him. He's probably the best interior disruptor in the class. A little bit, probably about close to slightly undersized at 6'4", 296. What we can talk about, at least with him, is that he has a lot of times that he'll be in that 3-tech spot in between the 2 guards, split the 2 guards, just has this violence he plays with big hands, very twitchy. He's able to essentially crash the pocket as well as be able to disrupt as a run defender. There is probably one other guy in this group that has that upside in some of what we can see those splash plays, and that'd be Mason Graham, who seems to be up until this point, a top 5, now maybe top 10 lock. The one thing, at least, of course, with him that we've been able to see is that there's some maturity questions on not just his play, but on him himself. Like, there's times, at least, where you're talking about him having not just quickness, having the pass rush, but there's also been times that he's left you wanting a little bit. And he was at 6 different schools, and I think it was 7 years or 7 schools in 6 years. There's people who have wondered, was he just chasing the money? Does he really care as much about football? A lot of these things give him why I think it's Lance Zierlein gave him a boom or bust sort of potential. The fact that the Cardinals haven't pushed him off of the board tells me they think, hey, like, this is one of those guys that you can probably take, be able to then have him mentored for a year underneath someone like a Calais Campbell next to a Dalvin Tomlinson. And you may be able to then have that interior penetrating guy of the future with him. Now, there is one thing that is kind of interesting, I think, about that. And it's going to be that we've seen this exact situation before, Marcos. We've seen, let me make sure I can pull up the information over here. So in 2016, Arizona Cardinals had a choice. They were able to look at bringing in I believe it was it wasn't Chris Jones. He was at out of Ole Miss. He was, I believe, at it was the other spot that was there. But we're talking about in 2016, Calais Campbell was in his final year with the Arizona Cardinals. It was a contract year. And a lot of people knew that Calais was going to get paid a ton of money to be able to like head over to a different team. He wanted to stay here. Cardinals looked at him at 30. There was questions about his back. There was a lot, at least, of people wondering, hey, is this going to be the guy that is this going to be the guy ultimately that the Cardinals are going to have to replace? So back in 2016, the Cardinals tried just that. They took a questionable defensive lineman who had some bursts, showed some highlights, but had some maturity questions out of Ole Miss in Robert Nkemdiche, and he was supposed to be the heir apparent to Calais Campbell. Now, fast forward to 2024, Calais Campbell's back in the desert. You got another Ole Miss defensive tackle in Walter Nolan who's got some questions as maturity areas, but he shows some phenomenal plays on film. This seems like it's almost the exact situation for the most part. I don't think that should scare you off of a Walter Nolan, but it does beg the question of, does the Cardinals have a potential of making the same mistake that they made with Nkemdiche again with a Walter Nolan?
Yeah, exactly. But I just can't say enough about it, about the film. Yes, the off the field stuff is very, especially for us, we have this tendency of just like looking at a player and then having to be burned by that player and then telling ourselves, yeah, let's not do that again. In some instances, that did cost us like for example, the person that was being kind of like compared to Robert Kimdiche was it was the defensive lineman drafted him 2 years ago, and he was this he was basically DL1, but he was dropping, and it's just slipping my mind. He went over to the Eagles, and the Eagles have not only
Jalen
nurtured
Carter.
him, but
Jalen
Carter. There
Carter.
we go.
Yeah.
So he was a comparison, and at that point, it was like, hey, what happened with him? Hey, let's take him off the board because he has off the field issues. He's very immature. Those were the sources and what you heard about it. If you did a lot more digging, you'd actually know that that Jalen Carter, not only was he going through a lot of stress, which is why his pro day was so horrible, but if you put him in the right environment, you could take a chance on that guy, and then look how he's playing. He's playing tremendously good for his position. Probably within the next couple of years with the Eagles, he's just gonna be a Pro Bowler or maybe even an All Pro type player if he's not already. So that was a guy that we as Cardinals fans thought to ourselves, no, take him off your board. We did this before. We're not going to do it again. And now you have somebody in Walter Nolan who his film sticks out because of the way he's able to penetrate, the way he's able to get to the quarterback, the way he's able to get the running back in the backfield. He's very not too slender for his size, but he's being compared to like a Aaron Donald type, like body wise, that the way he penetrates and whatnot. So Aaron Donald, we know that, since he's been in the league, I mean, he was touted as the best interior defensive lineman in the league for a very long time. Double-digit sack guy in the interior. Why would we want to pass up on another player like that when we already passed one up in Jalen Carter, who might not be a high sack person, but he's the type of guy that's a disruptor, controls the line of scrimmage, and in the right type of setting, right type of game, he could be a dominant player for you. And Walter Nolan could be that second coming of that, which is why I would still take a chance on him because the talent's there. We just need him to come into a room where the coach is going to be able to develop him and maximize his talents. And then him play alongside somebody like Calais Campbell, who we know is still playing he's still getting snaps.
He's still getting it.
So this guy is he's still being productive. Put him in that same room with a leader like that. We'll see if that's a good idea and see if he develops.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing we can talk about still while looking at the defensive line is the other one that seems to have popped up, and that would be Derek Harmon out of Oregon, someone who has been mocked countless times to the Cardinals. He's seen his draft stock slip, and a lot of that's because of shoulder injury. He was able to work out by doing the Combine 40, but didn't do some of the other drills. You're talking about someone who a lot of people really, really like as far as being one of the better pass rushers in the class. He's got a lot of length from the interior. He could slide out to the edge. You kind of be one of those guys that you'd pair next to a Darius Robinson. He has still some issues and questions, at least against the run, but as far as when it comes to his ability to get after it from that 3-tech spot, he's able to do it really well. There's a good set of clips that are highlighting how he's able to attack from multiple places with power, just able to get around, get pressure on the quarterback. That last one being against the Ohio State Buckeyes offensive line. Now, the thing with him, of course, is that shoulder is a question. The fact that he's not a guy that is in perhaps the Cardinals' top 5 or maybe one of the leaders for that makes me think that he may be one of those guys who, if the board's picked clean and you're like, hey, you know what, we're not going to get this guy if we trade back. We think that we're going to need a defensive lineman more than maybe we need a guard like a Tyler Booker. That would be one of those cases where I think they could make the pick. But Harmon's one of those players who, outside of the medical, was probably my favorite spot for Arizona, thinking that this is, if Josh Simmons did not clear their medical profile, if there was other questions with him, Harmon was one of those players who has the upside to be that interior penetrator like we've seen from an Eric Armstead. You mentioned Aaron Donald. I think that's a lofty comp to compare to a instant All-Pro Hall of Famer game wrecker. But he's one of those guys that would be a great spot in that for the Cardinals. I think it just seems like that there's enough concerns about that shoulder where maybe he needs surgery and is going to miss some time because he's there and he's fallen out of the top 10, and it's for similar reasons with Josh Simmons. However, it seems like the Cardinals, probably due to having Justin Fry, are a little bit more comfortable and confident in Simmons being able to be that guy than they are Harmon, at least at this current time.
Yeah, well, I mean, the chips fall where they fall, but that's after signing him as our offensive line, coach and whatnot. We lost our very talented offensive line coach who, for the first time in a long time, you can actually say that the Cardinals had some not only good offensive line play, but some good protection. And I watched the Cardinals for like season after season, thinking to myself, why can't they get a good pass protector at the left tackle?
Yeah.
Why can't they get themselves a good run scheme or a run game? Why is it that we always have to just watch our quarterbacks not only take too much pressure, sit on the ground, be on the ground for like snap after snap, or have to throw that ball sooner than they want to? And now we got some solidifying like players in those roles, but we also have an offensive minded coach or offensive line coach that was sought after, right? I mean, we lost him for a reason, because his resume was that good. And so to replace that guy, and you're replacing him with an offensive line coach who's also talented, is playing for a college that like is just pumping out offensive linemen in the first round. We got one of them, we get another one. They have that chemistry within each other. They also have Marvin Harrison Jr., who spoke highly about Justin Fry. This team's kind of becoming like Ohio State, like on the offensive side, just like the Eagles are Georgia Bulldogs on the defensive side.
Hey, might as well draft someone from a championship team, at least if you're going to. That seems to be part of the pedigree that Monty is looking at. That is a different approach than Steve Keim had. Let's talk about our last defensive player that you brought up, and someone who it's kind of seems like he may go before the Cardinals pick. He may go after, but that's going to be Jahdae Barron, the cornerback. I think that I agree with you in that he could play somewhat outside. I think that maybe he profiles as the versatility being one of the biggest pluses for him. Was super effective this year in terms of college football. It's something at least that we can talk about with always need a corner. Cardinals last year signed Sean Murphy-Bunting. He ended up being kind of a disappointment as far as a free agent signing. This would be a spot where if you're going to say, hey, we don't like the defensive tackles who are there, maybe we're saying Nolan, Harmon, we just don't feel as comfortable with them. We didn't expect that Barron was going to fall to us. That's something that maybe that could be another pick. A lot of people have looked at the Cardinals and said they're looking at cornerbacks. I think after today we can say feels like they're going to be going at the trenches first and then maybe looking at cornerback later, in which case Barron would probably not be there. But this is a versatile defensive back, similar to what the Cardinals really do like, and I agree that it's something that we could see as a long shot. Like, it would be out of left field because I don't think that he's going to be the pick there. But I agree with you in that this is one of the guys that lines up as someone that the Cardinals could be able to add to that defense, which needs playmakers on pretty much every level, from D-line, linebacker, to corner, and even the safety position of the future post Buda Baker. You got 1 year left of the contract with Jalen Thompson as well. Getting a guy who would be able to pair up with the likes of Garrett Williams seems to make some sense.
Yeah, and if we're going to draft him, we're going to try to put him at the outside position. This is what's so funny is that SMB, Sean Murphy-Bunting, played the slot for the majority of his career. So when he played out with Tampa Bay and they had that that above average to good coverage unit, it wasn't him playing on the outside. Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean were the outside cornerbacks who were playing excellent in those positions. And Sean Murphy-Bunting, he has the speed to be able to like keep up with these slot receivers and whatnot. But that's where he played the majority of his career. So we get him. We sign him to play the outside. He's the guy that's supposed to be the leader for this coverage unit, help develop these people, these cornerbacks on the outside. But he doesn't belong on the outside. He belonged on the inside. But for what we see right now, Garrett Williams, he goes down with an injury. Keitrell Clark is next in line to play that slot cornerback position. And that few snaps that we've seen Keitrell Clark, to me, I'm like, he's an apex. He's a slot cornerback. You don't want him on the outside, but that's the problem that we have when you drafted somebody as good as Garrett Williams and then you put him in that position and that's where he's staying. So we need that person on the outside. Jahdae Barron, once again, is profiled more of a slot, but he is very physical. I will give him that. You will have to play him on the outside. So in the NFL, he's going to be in a situation where his ability to cover like the middle part of the field, you're going to have to teach him how to, become a boundary corner. You're going to have to teach him how to use the sideline. You're going to have to teach him how he's going to be the main guy that they're going to pick off in the crack tosses. So what are you going to do when you see that tight end or that guard coming to you? Are you going to be physical, or are you going to be one of those cornerbacks that doesn't want to have any contact on the outside? Doesn't seem like he's that type of cornerback. It seems like he likes the physicality, so he probably will take on those blocks and try to sift through the traffic, try to be the force defender to force the runs back inside. So in some instances, I do like him, but in others, I don't. But here's the thing that I see as a comparison. He kind of reminds me of Trent McDuffie. Like he seems like that type of a player. Same profile, slot cornerback coming out, very physical. I wanted the Cardinals to draft him when he, was coming out. We didn't. So he looks kind of like the same comparison as that type of player.
Yeah, I think McDuffie, unless I'm mistaken, he went with a trade up for the Chiefs before the Cardinals had a chance to either make that pick, unless I'm mistaken, or that they had already essentially made that trade back to acquire Hollywood Brown. There's one more player that's here in this list, and of course, for those of you who listen to Arizona Sports, they called it Gambo 5 is one. We haven't focused as much on Kelvin Banks Jr. There's a chance, I think, that he's there, but from what we're seeing, it seems like his floor is going to be above Arizona. I think that he profiles as a guard who could be a left tackle, which kind of reminds you of a DJ Humphries type. He's got consistency, leadership skills. The last guy that we'll talk about is Michael Williams. There's a chance that he and his teammate, Jalen Walker, switch places from where they've been mocked. Walker's been mocked at pick 8 or 9 most of the year. There's a chance that Williams actually ends up going earlier, and then Walker's the one who falls. It does feel like that Walker's one of those like dream picks for Arizona because he kind of fits the profile of the way I would almost describe him is if you're going to have like a Hassan Reddick / Darrell Washington type where they're versatile, they can play the different spots, but they're very aggressive, physical, and can get after the passer from the edge. That's where Michael Walker and Michael Williams and Jalen Walker come in. Where Michael excels is he is a great run defender who just hasn't quite had the sack production that I think people were expecting. People wanted him to be like a 12 to 14 sack guy like a Will Anderson. Granted, he was struggling in terms of playing through this season because he said he's had an ankle issue that really kept him from getting a lot of that bend you need from the edge, and he played through it throughout the entirety of Georgia's season. If that's the case, then that may be part of where we're talking about with him rushing the passer and getting sacks is his floor versus that being his ceiling. I think that this is the one as far as for a need, talent, and fit is probably the best one that's out there for Arizona. I think that he's probably going to be a step below the superstar potential we could talk about in terms of a Simmons or at least Pro Bowl, but he's got the opportunity to be able to get there, especially I think in this Jonathan Gannon defense. As far as for the listing and his measurements go, you're talking about 6'5", 260 pounds. So he's got the size, the weight, long arms. He just doesn't have that sack profile to be able to go into that top 5 or that top 3 pick profile like the Abdul Carters or in the past a Nick Bosa, a Joey Bosa. But he does seem to profile as one of these guys where if he was there at 16 for the Cardinals, I think that you can just run in the pick, be able to get that guy. You can say, hey, with him and Josh Sweat, we got 2 guys that we can count on to try to get double-digit sacks this year. Could rotate him in with B.J. Ojolari and the likes of
Zayvon Collins.
So what are your thoughts at least on Williams? And just this is the one edge rusher. A lot of people are looking at edge rushers like a James Pierce we've talked about. Shamar Stewart's been talked about. He's the only guy that has kind of landed in that consistent prediction for Arizona.
He's a good size edge rusher. He's the type that you say you kind of build him in the lab, and that's what comes out. 6'5", 34-inch arm. The arm length is really what I'm looking at over here because you have a long-armed individual that, he's 6'5", and he still has the weight on him, which is 260, which is somewhere that's like on the, kind of in the middle when it comes to edge rushers. So he has good size, good weight. Looks like he knows how to shed blocks very well, and he can attack the gaps and whatnot, or try to make his moves to the inside and whatnot. It is a big question mark as to why he wasn't more productive, because in college, especially if we don't have the production going forward, there's some question marks about that. Now he has a good, like size and athleticism combination, and that's the reason why he's being he's even being projected in the first round, and that's for a reason. But the production kind of scares me because
right. That's why he's not going top 5 at this point, from what we know. Yeah, Abdul Carter, someone who tested into those places before, and that's something that we've been able to see is some guys like a Shamar Stewart, who has the same athleticism as Myles Garrett. He never had more than 1.5 sacks in a season. He's not someone who seems to be in the Cardinals' range as far as for where they'd want to draft, or you want someone else to kind of take the risk on him is a good way to think of it. Whereas Williams seems to have a great floor. That's going to be something that I think you'll want if you're a Cardinals fan to be able to see fall to. I just don't think that's going to be the case. Now, let's pivot here. We've talked about some of our top guys. We're going to take a look at the first round of the NFL draft, how it will play out, and then we're going to get into our final 7-round mock drafts for the Arizona Cardinals. So I'll go ahead here, and we're going to present our whole board. We're going to take a look at some of the big boards, some of the picks, and we're going to snap through these pretty darn quickly with what we're hearing, what we're seeing for our predictions. Let's start at least with the easiest pick to possibly make in this draft, and that's going to be Cam Ward, the quarterback. It's going to be likely at this point, it's pretty much a guarantee going number 1 overall. We've heard more that Travis Hunter seems to be already ready for a pick. Maybe there's a swap between picks 2 and 3 that happened. Some have wondered about a trade up from the Jaguars, even at pick 5 for Hunter. At this point, it doesn't sound like that's going to happen. So Hunter goes, followed by Abdul Carter. And the Patriots, the one report that came out today said that it doesn't matter if Abdul Carter ends up being there. The Patriots would still take Will Campbell. Like, they are that sold. They want to get that blind side protector for, I believe it's Drake May, who showed a lot of promise, at least as a rookie, starting in the last part of the season. He's got shorter arms, but it seems like this is the guy that the Patriots want. He was the top tackle coming into this year's draft, kind of like how Paris Johnson was top OT leaving it. Jaguars here are in a unique spot. You've got a lot of people who think that the Oakland Raiders are going to be taking Ashton Jeanty with their pick. They've got Chip Kelly on offense. Some people think that the Jaguars themselves could be taking him. Do you think that the Jaguars would stay put, take Jeanty? Could there be a trade that we could see with one of these teams trading up for Jeanty, though, with the Jaguars, Marcos?
I think they're going to try to sell it because they know that Jeanty is going to be available. And unless they get rid of I forgot the running back that they had with the Jaguars and whatnot.
Yeah, ETN.
They get rid of him.
Yeah,
Travis Etienne. I don't think they're going to be shopping, or they're going to be looking at Ashton Jeanty. So I think they're going to trade back.
Yeah, let's see if we trade back. The one team that's popped up more than any other that makes some sense from personnel standpoint is going to be the Chicago Bears. They've got 2 second-round picks. So you're talking about being able to get probably either at worst a third-round pick, or to get into the top 5, it probably cost you either pick 41 or 39. Let's say that they'll do the worst of those picks, offer it to Jacksonville, and we're going to force that trade to happen, actually. Let's say Jacksonville sends back something like 126 back to them. And the Bears are going to get their version of Jahmyr Gibbs and Jeanty. We'll see when check back in with the Jaguars later. Now, this is an interesting spot. Based off of some of the latest mock drafts, what we've seen is this is probably going to be an offensive tackle here. Jeanty's off the board. We're probably going to see a lot of people have put Armando Membo being there. There's been some reports that Calvin Banks Jr. is actually on the Jaguars board, is ahead of Membo. And maybe there's been some questions. Membo, I know there's some questions. There was a little bit of like an injury that most teams have cleared him from. Calvin Banks Jr., one of the guys that the Cardinals could be targeting. Do you think it'd be a Membo or a Banks as far as the possibilities for who would go here to the Raiders, Marcos, in our final mock draft?
I think it would actually just be Membo. You got a solidified tackle with Calvin Banks. You don't even know if he's going to be a tackle or not.
Yeah, and I think that's where, even if they view him as a tackle, we've seen him go as high as pick number 6. I think that the more athletic guy is Membo. If they're looking for a left tackle, Membo's only played right tackle before for the most part, but that's, I think, where it is. Let's go ahead and take it, stick with chalk with how it's been versus the late push. Panthers are on the board. This is where I think we could see a little bit of a shift. You've got Mason Graham is just sitting there ready and available to take. They've been linked to Jalen Walker or even a Michael Williams. I think in this spot, you just walk up, take Mason Graham, and you're going to see Tet McMillan now fall, I think, over with the Panthers. Mason Graham falling past to the Jets. Some have said it'll be a tight end. Some have said Jahdae Barron. I think Mason Graham, if I have to guess, I think he'd be the pick there. You can line him up next to the likes of Quinnen Williams, and you've got a really disruptive interior. That's what I would at least say would be the pick, and I would do that one. The Panthers, maybe they would see an edge rusher go in this spot. Maybe you would see, this is where we talked at least a little bit about Michael Williams being a guy who would go here. We've also seen at least that there's been some questions about linebacker. Jalen Walker has been another name that's been here for a while. I think if Mason Graham is the pick, they would take it. This could be a spot where, let's say some team is crazy enough to think the Saints go after a quarterback. This could be a trade back spot. I think at least at the end of the day, between Jalen Walker and Michael Williams, I want to buy the hype here for Michael Williams and say that he goes to the Panthers here at 8. And that's going to push a guy that we didn't think would be there, Jalen Walker, down the board a little bit. Now you got pick 9. So offense or defense or quarterback, what do you think the Saints are going to do here?
I think they're going to go quarterback, so they're going to take Shedeur Sanders. They're going to take a chance on him, bring him over to New Orleans.
I think that's a good possibility here with Sanders. I still think that Sanders is going to fall. From what we've heard from Ben Albright, they think that there's not going to be a quarterback who goes in the first 16 or 17 picks, Arizona being one of those teams. Maybe someone tries to get up. I think in this spot, what you're looking at with the Saints is you're probably going to be taking an edge rusher and a linebacker. Would make some offensive tackle would also make sense. They just did not pick up Trevor Penning's 5th round option, which means that they're probably going to be looking for a new offensive tackle. I believe that they traded away one of their tackles who retired promptly from the Miami Dolphins as well. So you put those things together, you hear about Kelvin Banks Jr. kind of popping up a little bit. We've also heard that Banks Jr., he's reportedly one of the top tackles, if not like the second highest tackle on the Jaguars board. I'm going to give him Kelvin Banks Jr. here, knowing that they're going to snipe the Jaguars, who would probably take him with that next pick. And I think the Saints would then maybe make a play for a quarterback. So now you're talking about you've got your quarterback, you've got your offensive tackle protecting him. That puts us to the Jaguars. And to me, this is pretty easy. I think that the Jaguars, when you're talking about what they were last year, they had a ton of yards with the receiver. We know they probably preferred an offensive weapon or an offensive lineman. With that top lineman off the board, I don't think that they go Simmons here. It seems like that their top guys were there. They really seem to be one of those teams that likes Ted McMillan, and yet the Dallas Cowboys lurking down over here. I don't think the Jaguars trade back twice. I think the Cowboys have another receiver they look at. Let's give the Jaguars Ted McMillan to lead us to the division rival San Francisco 49ers.
Oh, that's such a shame that the 49ers going to get Ted. I think like I said, I'd go punter for the 49ers as usual. I'm not sure. They look like they would take Walter Nolan here.
Yeah,
just
I could see that being the case.
They really like to take their chances on talented defensive linemen. So unfortunately, that's what I think they would.
Could give them Gray Zabel, who has been mocked as high as 11 from there. That would get them probably that interior guard. They've had needs that we know at guard is like their biggest need that they would have. Tackles a need. I think that with, like you said, having a guy back in the fold, being able to get someone next to Nick Bosa gets them back to that Super Bowl type of aspirations. I think this is where Walter Nolan could go. It's a tough spot to be able to say. But I cannot see a FCS guy like Gray Zabel going all the way in top 11. Niners are a little quirky when it comes to some of those picks, though. They sometimes will take a guy who should be a second-round receiver and Ricky Pearsall Jr. They'll take another player there. They like having those guys on offense. I think that with getting that defensive coordinator back, I agree with you. Let's say we give them Walter Nolan, taking us to the Dallas Cowboys. And to me, this seems pretty easy. A lot of people have said they love Josh Simmons, but they also need a number 2 wide receiver to go along with CeeDee Lamb. The guy that stands out here is another Texas guy to me, and Matthew Golden. He's been mocked quite a bit to the Cowboys. He's got the deep threat range, runs a full route tree, seems to be at a 4.29, the one guy that has that deep speed. And we know CeeDee Lamb, not a burner. He's a guy that's able to get separation, get open, especially out of the slot. I think that's kind of your perfect pairing to go with Lamb. And the Cowboys, for what it's worth, it wouldn't shock me if they were one of the teams that decided to take an offensive lineman, maybe even a Tyler Booker after seeing a couple of guys retire. Josh Simmons is a possibility here. But I don't think you're going to be able to get a Matthew Golden in the second round, whereas I think the Cowboys could make a move for one of these interior offensive linemen like Donovan Jackson maybe at the start of round 2.
Yeah, I'd go Matthew Golden. They keep the same guy in state, and obviously they're in their own backyard, so they know how to scout. They're able to scout him pretty well.
Yeah, we got another thing. Some people wondered why wouldn't the Cardinals take Golden? A good question. At least it's I think at least it's been here. Talking about at least with Marvin Harrison Jr. Like some people wondered, hey, like did he get separation at Ohio State? They had to see receivers more explosive. We do know metrically that Marvin did get separation at Ohio State. Now with the speed on field in the NFL, it's going to be a big year for him to be able to adjust. We're going to see if he can hit that superstar potential to be able to pair across from Trey McBride, or if the Cardinals, will see some regrets. I don't think that looking at the rookie season, looking at Trey McBride, the Cardinals do not seem to think that they had issues with Marv. I think you take a look at how Larry Fitzgerald and some of those others top receivers looked at the rookie year, and we'll have a no after year two. If Marv has not been panning out like how we thought, then maybe you take a look back at the position. But if you're just going to say, oh, Marv didn't look how we expected with the top 5 pick, we're going to immediately pivot to another receiver. I don't think that's going to be the case for them. It does lead us to a Miami Dolphins team. I think this is Jahdae Barron, Marcos. They need cornerback badly. They could also use a tackle. They could also use a guard. Some people have wondered if they're going to be looking at I've seen some people mock Josh Simmons this high. I've seen some people look at Tyler Booker this high. I've seen some people who have looked at their corner spot. The fact that they're trying to trade Jalen Ramsey to a different team tells me they wouldn't be trading him away unless they had someone else coming in. I think this is the Jahdae Barron spot if I'm going to pick one in the top 13 picks for Miami.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd go Jahdae Barron.
All right, so now we've got the Colts on the board at pick 14. They seem to have tight end as a large need. Most people have mocked Colston Loveland to them and said that tight end's the big need. Guard has also been up there. They're a sleeper team for Booker. You're also being able to see at least a little bit of a guy like Donovan Ezekaraku is here. Kenneth Grant is here. Jalen Walker is still here, at least on the board. If he falls to Arizona, that would be probably a coup. Who do you think at least would go here for the Colts, Marcos?
I think it would be Loveland.
I think it feels like really he's just been almost in pen that they've written it. I think that they need a tight end for that system that Shane Steichen is running. He's been the far better blocker with athleticism, injury questions, but Colts have not seemed to have that be an issue thus far. And now here we are with the Arizona Cardinals on the clock, on deck. I should say the Atlanta Falcons on the clock. I think they're going to get sniped here for an edge rusher, Marcos. I think that there is Jalen Walker is sitting on the board. We know that the Falcons could look potentially at Mike Green. I think that with Walker and his profile that he has, he's the guy that's going to probably fall a little bit closer to the Cardinals, but I still think that he's going to go here out of Georgia. He's the guy that probably profiles as more of a Hassan Reddick type, and the Falcons, they need edge rushers for years, I think. So I'm going to give them Jalen Walker here just ahead of Arizona. That brings us to your Arizona Cardinals. As far as for trading back, we've got the Chargers are looking to trade up. Trading back maybe a little far with the Commanders or the Bills. You're also taking a look at the board. You're probably going to pass on a Mike Green. You're not going to take another tight end. We've talked already about Jihad Campbell and Will Johnson's injury issues. That's going to leave us as far as when it comes to with edge rusher and with offensive tackle and with interior offensive line. I don't think they'll take Gray Zabel here. The Cardinals, like you said, have not taken an interior offensive lineman under Monty Austin for. It would be very against types. I think you can rule him out. You could probably rule out Tyler Booker just with the way the board has fallen. If the Cardinals get an offer for a team looking to trade up, I think that it would be for one of these tackles, like seeing Josh Simmons fall, seeing one of the edge rushers. I don't think anyone's trading up for a Tyler Booker, and Mike Green may not hear his name called. This feels kind of like what we've been saying for a while. It feels like this is a Josh Simmons pick that would happen here with the way that the board has fallen. Do you have any disagreements or think that they could go with a Tyler Booker in this situation?
I think they would just trade back. It would be too high for Josh Simmons, but he's the only one that you see on this board that the Cardinals are willing to draft in this position because they pretty much wiped the board clean, and none of the people that we wanted actually dropped to 16.
Right, you don't see a Walter Nolan there, seeing Ted McMillan, someone trading up. Jalen Walker just went right ahead of them. I think that those are all different options. Let's go ahead and do Josh Simmons in the first round. We'll get now here to looking at the rest of the draft. We'll breeze through here. Bengals, I think this is a spot where they're probably going to be looking at an edge rusher. I think this is the place where you could start to see Mike Green or Shamar Stewart come off of the board. They also could be looking at the interior offensive line spot. I think that whoever they take at the spot here, the Seahawks are going to take whatever guard is left. I think the Seahawks are that desperate for guard. Let's go ahead and say that Mike Green's going to be the one that they'll get, who basically will then allow Trey Hendrickson. Maybe he ends up having his price lowered now that they have an edge rusher in there. He was the top sacks leader. We're just going to go to the interior offensive line spot, and I'm going to actually go to OT because that's what Zabel is. We're going to give him Gray Zabel as that interior offensive lineman. I don't know if I like it as much for the Seahawks, but I think they're kind of desperate in this place here. I'd love to give them Donovan Jackson, but it feels like Jackson's going to go a little bit lower because teams like Zabel. You're going to now be looking at a Jihad Campbell potentially could be going here. You got Donovan Ezekuraku, I think is the guy that I'm going to give to the Buccaneers, unless you think there's another player that you'd love to give to the edge rusher and linebacker needy Buccaneers. You got a couple of linebackers and a couple of edge rushers available.
I'd go with the Garaku as well.
Yeah, let's grab him here. Broncos seem to want to trade back. That's what it seems like. I think that they were going to likely go after a running back, or maybe if the tight end is there, but it feels like Amarian Hampton's probably the move that they would want to make. I could see Travion Henderson, but seems like that would be in a trade back. Do you think someone would try to leap the Pittsburgh Steelers here for a quarterback? Could this be a potential spot where someone jumps from the second round? Could this be a spot where a team like, say, even the Los Angeles Rams, could they try to jump ahead of the Steelers to get a quarterback of the future past Matthew Stafford? Or do you think the Broncos stay put and take the running back that's been linked to them for quite a while?
I think somebody would try to snipe the Pittsburgh Steelers, because we all know that the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to try to, get that next quarterback to hopefully sit on the bench for Aaron Rodgers whenever he makes a decision. But they really, the Broncos do need a running back, and they need to, give some support to Bo Nix. So I think they'd pick Omarion Hampton.
Yeah, I think Marion Hampton's there, at least. Ben Albright, who's connected with KOA Denver, did give them Travion Henderson. Let's say that in this case, they're not able to have that trade up. Let's give them Hampton here. And don't be shocked if they trade back for Henderson, or just take Henderson at 20. Steelers, do they take a quarterback?
Yes.
There's been times they've been connected to Dart. There's times they've been connected to Sanders. Is this the spot where we see Shadur Sanders come off the board for you, Marcos?
I don't think they'd want Shadur Sanders specifically. I think they would try to take somebody like Jackson Dart, who's kind of rising, or Dylan Gabriel? I don't remember who the
the other one I know that's been rising has been Shaw has been rising. Some people have questioned at least about Jalen Milroe. Doesn't seem like he's going to go in the first round. That's another one that's there. He seems to be more developmental. I think it's between Shadur and Dart. If you had to pick one of those two right now, Dart seems to have the stronger arm and a bit of the upside, but he may have to start sooner. I think Shadur can start sooner. You got to pick one, Dart or Sanders. Which one are you going to go with for Pittsburgh?
I think they're going to pick Dart. I don't know.
Let's go with Jackson Dart. I kind of lean toward you. It feels like that might be a little bit weird. There's been some talk of Tyler Shuff going very high, potentially even to the Saints. I don't think that'll be the case right now. You got two players that seem to make a lot of sense now for you're talking about Luther Burden makes sense for the Chargers, needing a wide receiver who's got some speed. Teams have wanted to question his routes. You're talking about a tight end potentially. You've got Tyler Warren still there on the board. You also got Kenneth Grant. Let's give the Chargers Kenneth Grant. We're going to reunite Jim Harbaugh with his old defensive lineman.
Oh, that's right.
Put him right there in the middle field. That just seems to make a ton of sense. Here, the Vikings are one of the teams looking to trade back. I should say at least the Packers, however, will pick before them. They're likely looking at wide receiver. I think Luther Burden III makes some sense. Ibuka makes some sense here. Packers are seemingly going to be spending a pick on a first-round wide receiver. Do you think that they would go with that, or could this be an edge rusher like a Shamar Stewart that the Packers could take in? What are your leanings? And Will Johnson, of course, still being on the board. I think that's another option as well.
I think they're going to go with Emeka Ibuka because they kind of need that shifty wide receiver, and I think he fits that profile.
I think that works, honestly, gives that number one target. I think he's a better receiver instantly than all the other guys they have in Green Bay. I wouldn't be shocked if they took a Trey Amos there at corner. We know that the Packers are starting to have teams inquire about Jair Alexander. Cornerback, I think, is deep enough. They could get one in the second round. I don't think you're getting Ibuka in the second round. That leads us now to the Vikings, who actually have filled some of their running back need. This is a trade back spot. This is where I think a team may look at the Texans and say, hey, are we able to jump them and take a Josh Connerly Jr.? We've seen the Texans have gotten jumped before. Do you think that the Texans would maybe give up a draft pick to move up one spot? Or could they just sit still and say, hey, we can take a Luther Burden, get that wide receiver for the most part that fits our outside needs. We don't have to move up. We're going to be content if we need to take a round 2 guard. What are your thoughts on if the Vikings would trade back, or do they take one of the guys who back here on the defensive line, maybe even a Shamar Stewart? Tyleik Williams is another possibility here. I think this is a spot where someone could also look to be trading back. Someone could want to move up to be able to take that tight end that's fallen down the board in a Tyler Warren. What are some of your thoughts, Marcos?
Well, what I paid attention to when I keep forgetting what the defensive coordinator for the Vikings is, what is his name again? Robles. I keep forgetting what his name is, but the defensive coordinator for the Vikings runs.
Flores. Yes, Brian Flores.
Yeah, Flores. I said Robles. I'm way off. Yeah. So Brian
That's the
Flores,
ASU wrestler who won that title, at least for the most part, on the one leg, is the Anthony Robles. Yeah, continue here.
So I think he would be interested in getting Jihad Campbell, because Jihad Campbell has that size and that athleticism to be a good blitzer in his cover zero scheme, and they don't really need a linebacker, but they do need somewhat of like a Sam that could drop into coverage and whatnot, and also blitz from the edge, and he would be a developmental guy. So for them, I think they would take a chance on someone like Jihad Campbell, because he would fit that prototype of like a good blitzing linebacker, and you need that in the cover zero scheme.
Yeah, I could see that being the case. I think in this spot, though, what we're looking at is with some of the needs, defensive line, I think that there's enough defensive linemen who are still at least there that they'll be able to find. The other one that makes a lot of sense here that we haven't even talked about, but we've heard a lot of people have been higher on Travion Henderson than we have seen before. Vikings only have 4 picks. I think that they're going to want to trade back in this spot.
Yeah.
Here's the thing I'm looking at. When you're talking about a tight end that's going to be in need that's coming up for the Rams, it's like there's going to be a guy who probably falls there. Lions are looking to potentially get a receiver. We've heard that Jamison Williams potentially could be available. We also know that there is going to be a massive need for the Kansas City Chiefs to get an offensive tackle. Let's pull this trade off and say that we're going to have the Chiefs want to jump the Texans. I think they're going to offer, they've got more picks, I think, ultimately than the Texans. Let's have the Kansas City Chiefs jump up with the Minnesota Vikings. They're going to offer them pick 66. Let's say that the Vikings push for 63. They say, sure, we're out to a Super Bowl last year. We'll go down 3 spots from there. And we'll say that the Vikings will toss back. Let's say it's going to be a round 6 pick next year from Philly. We'll be able to make sure that trade happens. Let's say the Chiefs also toss in another round 7 pick this year, and we're going to now the Vikings, they're back on the board with some draft picks. They're dropping back down. The Chiefs are able to just go ahead and say, we're going to take Josh Connerly. He's going to be our tackle. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. That puts the Houston Texans in need for a receiver. I see one right there in Luther Burden. I don't think you're going to want to overthink that if you are the Houston Texans. You got a huge O-line need, but you've got talent-wise probably one of the other guys that I could see them taking is someone who we haven't talked about yet. You got Donovan Jackson and Tyler Booker. They need someone on that offensive line. If you're the Texans, who would you take, offensive line or receiver?
I think they would get an offensive line because they got rid of their stable at the left tackle position.
Let's give them Booker while we give the Rams the top tight end left on the board in Tyler Warren. They now have a scary offense with Tyler Warren being a pass catcher. You've got Puka Nacua out of the slot. And, of course, they've added, this is probably as part of their maybe last big push for the Super Bowl, Devontae Adams. Whoo, Rams, got to say, the division rivals are cooking. You now get Malachi Starks at least as someone who's there with the Baltimore Ravens. You've got the Lions coming up with some needs overall there. The defensive line seems to be in the line for the Commanders. I honestly think that this is one of those places where you're just going to say, hey, look, you got interior offensive line and regular offensive line who are available. I could see this being a Donovan Jackson sneaking into the first round pick. He played tackle last year. He could play very easily, transition back into guard. They could also be one of those teams that takes an edge rusher. You got James Pierce is still here on the board along with Shamar Stewart. Do you think that they would take Pierce Jr. or Shamar Stewart in the first round, or go with maybe the safer pick of the interior line? There's also defensive back here. Yeah, defensive back is the other one I could see, like a Will Johnson. Maybe this is where his fall stops. That would be a very Ravens-like move, you know? Who would you pick out of this group?
Well, Will Johnson being on the board, I think they would pick him up.
Yeah, I think that makes the most
like a Ravens pick.
Yeah, Lions at least now here. Let's give them Luther Burden. That's going to be kind of, maybe we'll see a possible trade option for Jamison Williams. Now you've seen that get threshed out. There could be a guard that they could take here. As far as Donovan Jackson's another possibility there, Ohio State guy. I'm going to give them the wide receiver. I don't think they're going to see a guy like Burden who falls to them. The defensive lineman here that makes the most amount of sense to me, at least, is probably Tyleik Williams, who would be out of Ohio State. I could also see this being a Derek Harmon pick. You know, they need to get him some pass rush, some juice. The Niners guy who's been there likes to be able to take some guys. Last year, he took a defensive lineman who fell to the second round, who was hurt, and we really liked in Johnny Newton. This year, I think he'll follow that up and take Derek Harmon, who sneaks and stays in the first round. We now have the Buffalo Bills edge rusher need, linebacker need. I've heard they really like Trey Amos as well. Who do you think the Bills would be looking at here in this situation? Marcos.
I think they would go with Trey Amos because they do need that cornerback help on the outside.
Cornerback would help there. That leaves us now to the Vikings. I think the Vikings, this spot will take a look and say, you know what? We've got our Travion Henderson right there. We now can pair him with a 30-year-old back, have ourselves set up for the future. Plus, we've got draft picks. Guy they could have probably taken up at 24, they're able to get back here. You have 3 first-round running backs as running the ball is in vogue. Oh, Eagles. Eagles. They've got everyone from Shamar Stewart to a safety in Malachi Starks. They also have, who's available at least at the interior guard spot, Donovan Jackson, who could immediately be there as far as an impact guard. This is the last pick of the first before we get to our Cardinal 7-round mock, at least to finish out our last 10 minutes. Do you think this is the Jahad Campbell spot? Do they just simply add one of the more talented guys who falls to them? Do they add James Pierce Jr. off of the edge? We know that they've not picked up the 5th-year option at a receiver. I don't think there's a receiver left here who makes sense. What's the best talent that the Eagles could just stumble into here on the board?
And they're going Malachi Starks because he's a Georgia Bulldog, and that's what they like to do.
They love Georgia Bulldogs.
Bulldog.
They could use another one of those safeties there. Let's give them the Bulldog. That's going to be our first round. Let's go ahead with the Cardinals, and we're going to take a look at the 7 rounds that they're going to have. We're probably not going to simulate as far as with how trades will go. Let's get to our spot where we're going to have our offensive lineman be Josh Simmons like we took in the first round. And that's going to then take us into round 2. Now, we're going to stop. Do we think that there's an opportunity for the Cardinals to trade up into the second round? Is there any player you think that would be worth taking or worth trading up for? Or do you want to just wait until we get to pick 47, Marcos?
Let's just wait to pick 47 there.
Right, let's go here a little bit. We've got a couple of teams left here. We saw guys like Connerly go. Benjamin Morrison at 38, I think, is a possibility. We see Donovan Jackson, at least if they want to double stack. I don't think they'll take him if they take a tackle. We see Walter Nolan goes to probably replace Chris Jones. They've worked out a Maxwell Harrison, Trey Amos. Yeah, a lot of these guys that we've been looking at have all gone off of the boards. I think in this scenario, you're going to say the Cardinals would be probably looking to see about trading back maybe from this spot. You've got, at least in this place, one of the guys that stands out to me here on the defensive line is Darius Alexander. I believe that he's a guy that the Cardinals had in as far as a top 30 visit as a defensive tackle. He's a bit older, but we also know they took a 24-year-old last year who is a bit older in Darius Robinson. This would be a Darius stack. I honestly think that we could take Darius Alexander here. I think he's got more against the run than Omar Norman-Lott. We can see Princely Imanomanele as far as an edge rusher, Carson Schlesinger. They just don't seem to take linebackers as early. TJ Sanders, I think, is one here. To me, Alexander's maybe the fringe first rounder. I would probably take him even over a receiver because I don't think that between Beck and some of the others, I think you get a guy on day 3 if you're the Cardinals. Do you have any issues you'd have with that mock draft pick?
No, I'd go with Darius.
Yeah, addressing the lines, the other corners that pop up here. Yeah, Siobhan Ravel coming off of injury. All the good corners, I think, got picked in front of them. Tyler Booker even would be an option. He went at pick 46. That would be interesting if the Cardinals take an offensive lineman and Tyler Booker is still there. Yeah. JT Tuimoloau goes 2 picks ahead of him. Some of the guys that would be on their board are gone. Maybe that's where the trade up is, but I'm with you on Darius Alexander. Now, the Cardinals are going to be seeing a lot of talent fly off of the board. They're going to get into round 3. At this point, I think they are going to try to trade back to get that 6th round pick back over here. They still have a guy like Norman Lott, Shamar Turner, the defensive line, Damian Martinez. We've got one team that's looking to trade back, 20 picks for the Miami Dolphins. Let's say that we do decide to move back from 78. Let's say that the Dolphins are going to get you back, though, pick 155, because you're going to see some picks go way late. And then let's say 253, while the Cardinals are going to, let's say 231, send back 225, that Jets pick. So they're able to pick up another pick in this year's draft. They do give back another pick at least, where now they have 224, 231. I'm going to say if the Cardinals are trading back 20 spots, they just get 155. They don't have to give up the 225 pick, at least for the most part. We'll move back in the NFL draft some 20 spots and take a look at what we see with the board falling in front of them. In this spot, to me, you want to get a future center in Jared Wilson, you can. You want to get a guy at least who, as far as the linebackers that we've been able to see, is still pretty high. Stutzman, Torrey Horton. Makes a lot of sense as far as fitting some of that size profile at 6'3". He's 22, but he doesn't have the same speed and athleticism. And I think you'd want to have a deep threat here. Let's go ahead here and say that this is a place where, honestly, wouldn't shock me with any of these different picks here. I think Restrepo, they would pass on at this spot. Roberts is one of the players, at least, that I think is very interesting, at least as far as for edge rusher need. But he's a little bit shorter arms. We've already gotten our defensive lineman. Let's do with something that I think the Cardinals could actually do when it comes into this spot. Let's see them go ahead and take, I think Strong is the other one that I was curious about as far as for a cornerback. He doesn't have as much strength in press man and not as good in run defense. He's a little bit slim for what the Cardinals would be looking for. I think in this spot, honestly, give me a Jared Wilson. They have now a guy who can play guard for a year, move over to center. He does also fit the athleticism that they're looking for. 97% athleticism score metric. Nice. You may be talking about that. I think this is one of those weird spots where you've gone offense, defense, offense. Now, round 4, this is where the Cam Scatabo range would start. He went earlier here in the PFF mock draft. With each of these different places, I've said we haven't seen cornerback get adjusted. I like taking a Kobe Bryant here in this spot. This is the second, I think, of the second day 2 pick that the Cardinals have had. I think you're looking at wide receiver and corner are the 2 spots that you're looking at here. Isaiah Bond is someone who was potentially going to run in the first era. He's fallen out since that spot. I think it's more likely that the Cardinals would get a guy a little bit later, like Kendre Lambert-Smith. To me, seems to be the guy that we've heard that they've at least liked a little bit. Let's go ahead and give them Kobe Bryant. He's a guy who's a little bit smaller as far as, but he's still 6'1", 175, so he's slim, but he plays fierce with the tenacity. Let's say that he may be a little bit on the slim side for the most part, but the competitor for the most part and how he plays the game, I think this is not a guy you take round 1. Let's say this is a guy you would take, though, in round 4. I think he makes more sense than some of the other guys who are there on the board. And then we're going to finish up at least with a few more picks. We got pick 152. This is where the Cardinals love taking their linebackers. Jack Kaiser is one of the guys, at least, who has okay athleticism. The Clemson athleticism of Barrett Carter is something that I think we're more looking at. He's a good run defender, good in coverage for the most part, very versatile. He's 6'1", 230. So the question is he a guy who's too limited? What we've seen is that the Cardinals do pretty well with some of the undersized guys at linebacker. I think you take him there, and now you're back on the board at pick 155. We really have not talked as much, at least, about some of these edge rushers. We could also say at least we took our linebacker. We're starting to look at the wide receiver spot here. Maybe here you could at least say that this is where the Cardinals may also be looking at potentially running back. So I think we've already grabbed our linebacker. We've got an edge rusher here. I think that the Georgia guy seems to be the one that makes the most amount of sense here. Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, coming out of a big school. He's got very good physical tools, rotational defensive end. I think that's one of those guys who could be a future Quinnen. I want to say not Quincy Williams. He was to the Patriots this last year. Not Quinnen Williams.
Not Quinn Williams. I wish.
Not Quincy Williams, at least here. I'm going to look up the Patriots depth chart because they just signed their star defensive tackle away. He's got the weird Q name. Oh, sorry, not Q name. Oh, other Williams, Milton Williams.
Milton Williams. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, Milton Williams there. All right, so this is one of the spots where it looks like we've seen some of the other players like Keandre Lambert-Smith. This is the guy that I think the Cardinals would have loved to have taken here as the vertical threat. I think that I would probably look at trading up for a guy in that spot here. As far as for late rounds, what you're looking at now, we've got our center picked out for the future. Probably just kind of throw some darts at the dartboard here. I think that the one that we can see, at least as far as with someone like Prather, is interesting. A big outside possession receiver can make it as a day 3X. This would be kind of your Michael Wilson break glass in case of emergency if he gets hurt type of a move. That way you're not getting the speed threat that you're looking for. Wells Jr. is one of the guys, at least for that, who just did not seem like he was going to pan out for the most part. He's a little bit old, stayed in school. When it comes down to one of the guys the Cardinals worked out, they did work out Jalen Smith. We already had our cornerback. He's kind of built like a nickel, but did play outside. If they do decide to take Lambert-Smith earlier, I think that would be the guy. But let's go ahead and give them the other possession guy who can be there on the roster in Prather. And that's going to end up taking us to the Cardinals' final selection. We've now got all of the mock drafts set. So I think if we're going to grade this mock draft, I've got one fault with it, Marcos. We didn't get Lambert-Smith. If you get them that speedy vertical deep threat receiver, maybe you take him or trade up for him, trade up your 7th round pick, get back up at least, or take him ahead of Ingram Dawkins. There you go. But this is how we've addressed it. We've got the Cardinals right tackle of the future, another defensive lineman of the future. You've got a future guard / center combination that you'll be able to play and plug in either at right guard or center for the future. Another interesting cornerback who can make plays. Again, I think this could be the flip-flop where you take a receiver here in round 4. Barrett Carter being the linebacker, Ingram Dawkins, Caden Prather. Now, there is one other thing at least that we can talk about for the most part, and that's Cam Skattebo. Skattebo has people saying he'll go round 3. Some people say he goes round 5. I believe that he's going to go in round 4, and there's 7 teams he's taken a visit with. Do you think the Cardinals could take him if he's there on the board in round 4? Some Cardinals fans have said take him round 3 or trade up for him. He's the one intriguing guy to me because I think he fits Gannon's mold, and there is still right now maybe not a need for a third running back. But we know, at least from last year, we did get to see that their third down back that they had, they do like in terms of, I want to say his name is Amari DeMercado. It may not be a need that lines up, but they still spent a top 30 visit on him, brought him in. He's kind of like what some people have called a James Cameron light. I've called him like a James Robinson light. Maybe he doesn't get a lot of carries, and one season he just, boom, goes off for 1,200 yards. Do you think that this is a spot where the Cardinals would take him if he was to fall on this spot? Do you think they should take him if they fall on this spot? Or are we kind of just seeing ASU fans wanting that homer pick to come home, kind of like people giving the Cardinals Tet McMillan at pick 16?
Yeah, and round 4, I would definitely take him. You could always make like spots for like talented running backs and the type of running back that he is. As I mentioned before, he's the type that takes contact and has good contact balance. And round 3 is a little bit too rich unless it's later in the round. But I definitely, if he was on the board at round 4, I would take him.
Yeah, the one thing that we had to wait a little bit on was edge rusher. It would be interesting if the Cardinals would be able to make a trade, maybe with pick 47 or 98 to get in a Trey Hendrickson if he's available. That's another potential thing we could see happen on day 2 if the right pass rusher falls. Again, it wouldn't shock me if we see a cornerback go in round number 2. Perhaps a wide receiver like a Kyle Williams is the one guy who seems to be a vertical threat. But when it comes to the Cardinals, we know a lot of times they'll draft guys who they have top 30 visits with. So we've seen at least Kelvin Banks Jr. is a guy that's in the Gambo 5 or like the team's top total. They met with Jalen Smith, who's 5'10", 187, but played well on the outside. We talked about how we can take Darius Alexander, Josh Simmons. We know that Kenneth Grant is there. Lambert Smith, being 6'1", 190 pounds, runs a 4.37. I think that's the day 3 target that the Cardinals would have. Probably taking him, if not round 4, then maybe by round 5. Ty Robinson, at least, is one of the guys that's there in round 4. If they end up going, let's say, tackle, corner, or defensive lineman, trade up for a tackle. They met with the other running back, Krosky Merritt, who looks like he's probably going to be undrafted. Maybe he would be a day 3 pick you'd take. Jamar Turner's supposed to go somewhere in round 2 or 3. We think that Campbell is probably a guy that they're not going to trade up for. They don't take guys that highly. Sanders, totally possible round 2, along with Nolan round 1. Got Trey Amos, who's been in there, along with Jalen Walker. We know that James Pierce is not going to be on their board, and Micah Williams is probably off their board. I've heard similar about Princely Emmanuele. I heard that he's off some teams' boards with character questions and concerns. Femi Oladejo is someone that the Niners will probably target. If they don't take an edge rusher, they could target him round 2. Scourton is an edge rusher if the Cardinals go offensive line, and he falls there at round 2. Will Johnson they did meet with. And Cam Scadabo is the guy that I think if he's there in round 4, I would not be shocked if the Cardinals took him. I would be maybe not surprised is the right word, but it seems like he's going to go early before their pick in round 4. They only have 6 picks. Shamar Stewart being the guy that maybe is a trade back target. And the last one that they met with, as far as that being Anthony Belton, I think this is the case of you go with a Walter Nolan, you get your second round offensive tackle. That's probably the guy that they would be looking at because I don't think Josh Connerly will be there. But yeah, that's going to be our mock. Is there anything else you want to say before the draft, Marcos? By this time tomorrow, we will probably know who the Arizona Cardinals' newest playmaker is.
Just excited for tomorrow, as usual. There's going to be some, at the very least, we don't know what to expect, but it's going to be exciting to see who is going to drop, what our draft board is going to look like, and if we trade back from that position. So that's what I'm excited about. So we'll see how it pans out tomorrow.
Same here, and I'll be able to tweet out our first round mock draft as well as that final 7-round mock draft here later tonight. At least you'll be able to find that. Make sure that you're subscribing as well to our YouTube channel at the Redbird Reboot podcast, as well as following us on X at Redbird Reboot. You can follow Marcos and I. Guys, this is it. We finally hit draft season. The Arizona Cardinals will be on the clock tomorrow. This has been the Redbird Reboot. You guys have been rebooted, which means it's time for us to log off until the draft, guys. Take care, and you guys have a wonderful evening, and go Cardinals.
Go Cardinals.